So I wanted to talk about sales intelligence today because my conversations with Joseph have been around sales, and like I'll kind of morph my analytics to be whatever it needs to be, and one of the things it needs to be is sales. So I thought, well, what could we cook up in the sales department that would really generate, like how could intelligence be used in sales? So how come that's going to the end?
Oh, I must hit the wrong button.
Well, I mean, I feel like people don't want my presentation. I mean, how do you get to the end? Of my presentation. Now I'm seeing like I'm going back in time now to. Okay, so next slide. So what we cooked up for you today were company identification. So there's some use cases where it's important to know who is coming, and like who are the companies that are reaching out to me. Is there money there for leads? And can we identify who they are? Instant persona identification using big data. That's a nice cook up thing. Sales channel optimization using point of sale, social media. Of course, I'm not giving away everything. I'm just kind of giving a taste of everything. Crowdsource social sales intelligence. Sales intelligence by venue, and influence sales analysis. Identify key players, secondary players. Well, I had a little fun with the last one. But anyway, let's go to the next slide. So Google, one way you can get the lead information is Google Universal Analytics is a new version of Google Analytics that's been out for about a year now in beta test that will take data from everywhere. So it'll take check-in data. Not everything's enabled yet, but it will take data of varying types. There are different function calls. You can use Google Universal Analytics now, but not everything is fully enabled yet. And there's a separate tag that you have to use. If you're going to use it, you have to make a separate instance in your Google Analytics profile. But they're getting better at taking a lot of different data, and I think Google wants to be the place that puts all the data as much as anybody else wants to be. Does it go in Salesforce? Does it go in Oracle? Does it go in Google? I think Google's made a play for Google Analytics is going to be the place where people can also put a lot of the data in if they want to put that data and mesh it together. So we're getting analytical, and if we go to the next slide, so Universal Analytics, I've taken an example. Yes?
Can we ask questions now? Or?
Well, why don't you wait till the end, because otherwise I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I'll take a question, one or two, but I think I'll take yours now. Yeah.
But as far as like an SMB goes, what's the value of switching over to Google Universal? Never heard of.
Well, because there's new features that you can't like put point of sale data into regular Google Analytics easily, but you could into Google Universal Analytics. You could put geolocation data into Google Universal Analytics, but you couldn't put it into the regular vanilla. So right now for the next year, there might not be an advantage unless you want to experiment. But if you wanted to track your dog's movements, somebody did this. They were Justin Catroni was talking about a ski lodge he likes to go to and how to track. He's a well-known Google evangelist that now works for Google, along with Avinash Koshak. But there was another guy in Australia that wrote how do I track my dog, using Google Analytics? Could I put collar on the dog, and could the collar talk to a transmitting station? Could the Google Universal Analytics take in that data and put it into Google, if there was enablement to do that? And apparently there is. Not that many people are doing that kind of thing right now, but there is. That's not something you could do with Google Analytics vanilla that's out now. So that is a consideration. You have a message here. I don't know what that is. So anyway, so that's the answer is for your vanilla applications, you may want to wait a year, but there are others that will want to do it now, depending on what your application is. So, but how if you were to ski lodge, I'm going to talk about that Justin Catroni talks about, you might want to do Google Universal Analytics now. If we go to the next slide. You know, you could track the website now using regular Google Analytics, but you could also do it with Universal Analytics and everything and all the forms and all the buttons. But if you go to the next slide, the Universal Analytics will let you also take the data from the cash register and put it into Google Universal Analytics. And it'll also let you, go to the next slide. It'll also take the mobile information, which to some extent Google Analytics does now, but Universal Analytics will do a better job of it. So we hope. And then the next slide is, and it'll also get the check-in data from the snow lift. So it'll get that data. And then the next slide is you can also mash up the snow forecast data and use that and mash it together to some sales intelligence. And some lead identification, because Google Universal Analytics will allow CRM data to go in there as well, which currently Google Analytics does not allow. So you don't get like people's names or anything. You can get that out of Omniture, but you can't get that out of Google Analytics today. So, so that's one example of, if you mesh that all together now, Cutrone didn't show what that mashed up looks like, because a lot of people are more like talking about what they would do with Google Universal Analytics. There aren't actually a lot of people talking about what they did yet with Google Universal Analytics. But I think it's fair to say that in the next year or two we'll see examples, and then now with the Google Glasses, Project Glass coming out, and I wrote an article for ClickZ where I talked about how gaze metrics are going to be captured, so that now marketers will have a better sense if they want to know someone who's actually looking at the Eiffel Tower versus someone that says they're looking at the Eiffel Tower, and how long they gazed at something. There's that data is already there. The potential to get that data in an anonymized way that's not necessarily invasive of privacy is probably doable. I posited in a ClickZ article a month ago or so that you needed to have a new query language developed to pull that data out, because right now you would have to search for, show me how many people gazed at so-and-so, for how long, where, and all that. And I think there's a higher level query language to be developed that hasn't been developed yet. But I think that there is also hints of patents that Google has that they say they won't use, involving advertising and charging people who are advertisers, not people, who are looking at objects that are branded, and then going back and charging the brand, who are advertising for the gaze, So I mean, I think it's clear to say that 2 or 3 years is when we're all wearing glasses, besides these just cosmetic ones for me mostly. But that helped me see you a little better. Just basically will enable marketers and others to get the data they always really wanted all along, but we're using other proxies that didn't really do a good job. Like in current social media analytics doesn't do a good job. Web analytics is totally qualitative. In fact, I was thinking about this very thing when I was grading some of my students. I teach at Rutgers and I teach at Baruch. I teach an MBA class at Baruch I just rushed from. And I teach a social media for the arts online at Rutgers. And I realized that the difference between qualitative and quantitative data is when I go in and look at my students' work to see that they've done their assignments and to count and give the grade, to give them credit in the grade book is a quantitative exercise. You contributed to the discussion. You did this. You did that. You got the thing. Qualitative is me having to actually read their entries and decide what it means. The two things are necessary for a grade. You need both, basically. You need most analytics that we get, Google Analytics and at L, are all quantitative tools. They're bean counting tools. They collect numbers of events, number of occurrences, triggers. They don't provide actual business intelligence. They can be constructed in a way to connect information that turns into business intelligence, but they take a lot of enablement in order to do that. By themselves, they're just bean counters. So there's no insight that actually comes out of any of these tools without a bit of configuration and time. And a lot of it's what happens inside the stakeholders and inside the analysts that really make the decision. So, but having said that, the tools that we had to work with in the last 15 or 20 years really didn't lend themselves to any kind of brick and mortar business insights, let's face it. They did not. And the new era of what's coming will. There may be a lot of privacy issues about people knowing they were at the Eiffel Tower looking at something for 20 minutes. And maybe you don't want to be known that you're there, you know, so there's a whole bunch, and the NSA, of course, is going to want to know what everybody's doing, because they always want to know what everybody's doing, for whatever reason. So, you know, society has a lot more to grapple with, although it'll be great for photographers, because guess what? 3 months ago, I was walking, I'm back and forth a lot, I'm here, but I'm also in Providence a lot of the time, and I was walking down Pleasant Valley Road, and I saw a deer. Right in front of me. Very unusual to see anything like that in that part of town. And the moment I was thinking about picking up my iPhone camera and taking a picture of the deer had already bolted. But I was thinking if I had the glasses, I would have actually taken a picture right then and there. I could have told. So for photographers, for a lot of people, the glasses are going to make a big, big difference. It's going to be a whole game-changing thing for a lot of things. And for marketers, it'll be a game-changing thing, because eventually in 2 or 3 years or somewhere along the line, when everything gets sorted out and enough people are wearing the glasses and there's some sort of query language to pull the data out, they'll be, well, give me how many people really looked at my ad, you know? Well, how many people engaged with my ad? Well, you'll be able to know because they looked at it more than 10 seconds, you know? Well, right now, that kind of stuff you can't really get easily out of analytics unless you stick them in a website. So a lot of you know, influencer identification up to a point where privacy will be solved, but I think those things are coming. And I think the new era is going to be a lot better than what we've had so far. I think we've had to cobble along with tools that were never really intended to do the kinds of things that we are doing with them, and they never really meshed in with any kind of real business. They never really could answer the questions that most marketers have, because they were not designed. They were tools designed for different purposes that people are trying to sell for whatever purpose. So social media is good. Going on, because Joseph realized that I need to go on. So he said social media is good at finding potential leads for high net worth individuals. And I posited this about 2 years ago. My book first come out, that social media would actually be pretty excellent at those kinds of things. And I don't know why your Twitter keeps going, you know, I hope the camera isn't putting that in there. But social media is good at finding potential leads of high net value. And I thought to myself, well, why? I was giving a talk at McGraw-Hill, you know, to an organization that's similar to LinkedIn, that's on financial planners, and they wanted to know, can social media help me get leads? You know, like if I was a real estate broker, can I find people who might want to buy a condo, you know, like with social media? Well, let me see what I could do. So the next slide is, you know, I thought about, like, if you had a query and you put it in a Radian 6 or a Salesforce Radian 6 now, you know, there's all the other databases that a company called Wealth Engine puts together. And Wealth Engine is used a lot for hospitals and various other types of organizations that have a database list, and they want to find out how much money certain of those people have, you know, versus others. You know, basically it might come down to, you go to the hospital, and if you're high on the list, you get better service because you have more money, and they can see that. So there's a lot of data that Wealth Engine collects that's public data, but that is in a lot of different places. And they put that data together, and you email that email list that you have of your subscribers goes into Wealth Engine, and Wealth Engine talks to Salesforce, the database, and Salesforce then, you know, tells you which of your customers has verified real estate holdings worth so and so much, and you know, they have about maybe 20 different stats that they can pull. But I thought it would be interesting if we had Wealth Engine feeding into Radian 6 or Brandwatch or some other tool like that. So when you saw the River of News, if you could resolve the email address to the hash, to the Twitter account or the Facebook account, then you could superimpose the wealth holdings. And of course, you actually see that Radian 6 now with Salesforce Radian 6 in a way has done something like that with some of the partners that it has. Wealth Engine isn't one of them, but certainly if Wealth Engine and Radian 6 were to get together, they could do something like what I'm showing here, because what I have here is mock numbers: income, pension, stock, real estate. So you could superimpose that over the tweets on the River of News, and as you were monitoring discussions on real estate where your keywords were about real estate, you could see who were possibly who could potentially be people who might be able to buy a condo, or people who might be able to. Of course, more sardonically, I'm thinking of casinos who are monitoring people who are, at the casino gambling on Williams, Lord of the Rings, or some of these other games where they can gamble at the casino, and they're gambling with their online games, and they're tweeting to their friends about how they're doing in the game as they're gambling, and meanwhile the casino nearby or around the corner has got a bunch of analysts looking at a feed and saying, this person hasn't gambled enough. They clearly have a net worth of so-and-so. Let's send a pretty attractive lady over there to distract them so they can, spend more time playing. And I thought to myself, that's not that far-fetched. It isn't really that far-fetched at all. The technology to do that already exists. I'm not saying that the casino's using it, but it's there. And probably, there is some probably they say in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, as soon as you arrive, you're a closed-loop system. So those people know. They in the business of creating money, make it their interest to know how to get the most money out of you. They know you're there, so they're going to control every aspect of your experience. The minute you get off the plane in Las Vegas, they know exactly what you're doing. That's what I've heard, and I probably believe it. But certainly this application of social data isn't far away. And if you look at, as I do, because I have access to Radian 6. There are several partners of Radian 6 that have, such as Peak Analytics, and I'm thinking of Clarabridge and Open Amplify that do semantic analysis and meaning analysis that sit on top of Radian 6. That Radian 6 sends like 100 records to them. They look at it and say, this is the data I have, and they send it back, and then Radian 6 stores that. And that model would work very well for Wealth Engine as well. I mean, the fact that they do or they don't have in this case, a insights application that you can buy for a couple $100 a month to run your social stream only shows me that, either there's, some reluctance on some people's parts to connect those things together, but it exists and it's there. So go to the next slide. It can happen. So another thing is company identification by analytics, infrastructure compliance. Well, I took this on, and Joseph and I talked a little bit about this in my last ClickZ article on Convergence analytics. Go on to the next slide. This is a chart from a company called, what are they called again? L2 Think Tank, and they are expensive think tank. It costs like $5,000 to go to one of their events. They're an incubator out of, I don't know if they're an incubator, they're out of NYU. So I don't know exactly what their story is. You can't attend anything that they do without paying a couple $100,000 just to attend it. And if you are a fashion brand or some, you buy their research to tell you various things about how you and your competitors are doing and the lifestyle and attitudinal things, so on.
You have to be a member. My company is a member of
Right. So I've talked to them, but it's not cheap to be a member, and you can get invited to the Times building in November if you're a member for free to their thing. But they republish reports, and some of them there's a free version, and this one was brick-to-mortar drivers and e-commerce drivers across, I think, 52 or 53 stores. That said, how come fashion brands aren't any good in a lot of cases at driving online customers to brick and mortar stores, and like who is doing it better. And so they looked at the sites of all of these different companies, not all of them represented, and said, how many things do they have enabled in their site versus how many e-commerce things, or how many things are they doing brick and mortar? And then they put, so it's basically a qualitative exercise of going through and seeing, does this site have email that resolves to a store locator, and is it working? And that would be, so they were counting about 10 things in one direction and 8 things in the other. Whatever, they came up with these points, and I said, well, okay, it's fascinating. Let's look at the data if I mashed it up. So next slide. What I did is, because I write this monthly column for ClickZ, and I kind of thought, okay, well, and lately it's on Convergence analytics, which is these big implementations of taking a lot of different data. It borders on MDM, master data management, but essentially you want to take all your data and come up with some kind of converged, this is implementation as they're coming up with, in this instance, of where you're taking all your data and making intelligence out of it. And so I thought, well, how would I know if any of these companies really could be a converged place where, like the ones that L2 gives me? And what I did is I took LinkedIn data where I looked at companies, the number of analysts that worked there in LinkedIn. I looked at the total headcount, which they represent, which is not always accurate, but at least it tells you if they're over 10,000 or between 5 and 10,000 or under 5,000. So the actual number might not be there, but you get a pretty good idea. Does this company over 10,000 or whatever? So, and I said, what's the number of analysts that work at some company? Because in Convergence, you have a lot of internal stakeholders and needs to mash up a lot of data. So it's reason to me that you need to be at least, I said, 1% of the company need to be analysts. So because you have to have stakeholders who will work with the data and specify what needs to be merged. If you're L.J. Bean or a J. Crew, and you only have 2 analysts and you have 10,000 people, then it seems to me like this is not a place that's going to do sophisticated data modeling, or they're going to hire some other people to do it because they simply don't have enough people to do it, and they're not invested in it. So I looked at a combination of factors, but this shows that is 1% or more of a company's people analysts of whatever kind, financial, web, search, And the next slide, I said, using Facebook advertising data, using a variety of keywords, I ran and I said, well, how many of these people who would work at a company who said they worked there, who were on Facebook, were interested in online marketing at all versus the head count? So I saw like Macy's and Nordstrom's and Gap seemed to have a lot of people at the different levels, and I filtered out interns, anyone who graduated college, and basically I was trying to filter out interns and looking at real employees. So based on the L2 data that I could get, I basically said, well, it looked like Macy's and Nordstrom's and the Gap have, and Chico's, I guess, that has like, a sizable number of people based on the total head count that look like they're interested. And that was a different data set, So then the next one, I said, well, let me match that together and said, with Twitter data. So I estimated a company that could succeed at doing a converged application. And what I did is I basically highlighted this part here. And I said, and bear in mind, L2 didn't give me all the points identified. So I had all the companies' names, but I didn't have the rankings for many of them because I couldn't tell who they were. They didn't give me the numbers for everything, so I had to read them off the chart. Nordstrom, Macy's, and Bloomingdale's seemed to be those who had enough analysts that were doing enough according to the L2 methodology that looked like they would be interesting to either sell converged solutions to or that they could actually build something. And in fact, when I did the research, I found that Nordstrom actually had a data innovation lab where they hire people to figure out retail and analytics. Macy's has like 140 people whose 1.4% of their whole workforce is analysts of one kind or another. And of course, retail chains, large department stores are probably going to do better at translating because they have to, So Yeah, I use the data, to say, it's not like these guys couldn't come up in this graph, but L2 didn't give me their data, so I couldn't really assess it. So go on to the next slide. So that was one way I could say, I could use this data to mash up and say, who are my prospects, who are companies that are mature enough, in fact, that I should approach for my, say I was a company that wanted to help them can build a sophisticated set. Who would be a sophisticated enough company that I'd have somebody to talk to at that company that would need my services, that might appreciate what I'm doing, and that's how I found that data. Now, instant persona identification using big data is also intelligent. We know a lot of people are on mobile devices, and clearly this is a source of from, I don't know who it's coming from actually, Business Insider, but I don't know if that's that wearable device, meaning the Google goggles or the Jawbone or the other kind of devices. That number is going way up. We're already over here, and looks like this is gonna, we're here right now, and it looks like it's gonna go up about 500% by 2018. That's the prediction, right? So, I mean, and that's the market, 14, I guess, in millions. So it's going to go to like, what is it, 1.4 billion or some more? Or is it 14 billion? I'm not sure. But you can see that those devices also collect a lot of personally identifiable information about you. I even downloaded an app to monitor my sleeping the other day. Because I sometimes wake up and sleep and cry out and do things like that. And I wanted to see if there was a device that actually did that. It was an app. My phone actually did that, records things. So, but a lot of the devices actually do record a lot of information about you. I don't know how much they share, but a lot of people have gotten into personal analytics. And so a lot of that data is out there in different ways to be used for different purposes. Not all of them bad purposes, but it's there. And of course, as more people are wearing these devices and Google Glasses and other similar ones, there's more potential for that. So we're on the edge where, and even there's some stores today, that some major in-store analytics players, including Gnome, Perception, Retail Next, they use small sensors in the store's Wi-Fi network to track a shopper's mobile device down to a 1 to 3 meter proximity, meaning they don't have to know who you are, but they can pick up the cell signal. And they can know exactly where you are and your movements and heat map across the store, so they could see the parts of the store. And in fact, when I'm up in Providence a lot, I'm connected with the Water Fire Festival that goes on regularly there. And they were interested in a solution that would provide a map of where the flow most happens. Because that could affect where they put stands and where they do things. So a lot of companies even now are doing it. And Nordstrom, I think not only Nordstrom's, but a couple of the companies are using vendors to help CRM vendors that are basically optimize in-store experience. Some of it mobile, some of it other. So there's already things going on that you don't hear about, but stores are not necessarily talking about, where they're maximizing their profits by making sure shelf life is there, that the right products are on the shelves for people who really want to get it. And I figure the ones that are smart are really beginning to mash up the data, doing these converged projects that I'm talking about. So go on to the next slide. And with this in-store analytics, retailers can discover and discern the same expansive type of information they used to get from web analytics if they couldn't, in fact, enable their analytics. They know the popular zones, the conversion rates, and the segmentation, and so on. So go on to the next one. Another way people are getting some of this information is Twitterlizer and Social Bro help identify personas on Twitter, as well as get information about them that you could put them into Google Plus circles and use ripples. And you can connect. Once you identify influencers, you can sort of figure out where they are, and then you can start targeting your messaging to them. You can come up with some segmentation that makes sense for your business, and then continue to map to them. It could be local based, or it could be based on what they're interested in. Go on to the next one. And then I see even people, this meetup is called an inbound meetup, but the guys in Boston who originally founded the inbound thing, or the HubSpot people, they have their own CRM persona identification template you can download. I downloaded it just to see what was in it. This is an example from a couple of slides of, they give you some setup of how you would set up persona identification. And some of this data can actually be pulled from a variety. You can certainly pull, if you solve someone's presence on LinkedIn, You get a lot of this information. And you can probably get this from Wealth Engine. You can, I don't know about the identifiers. Some of that's going to be qualitative, but you go to the next slide. This stuff is going to probably be qualitative, so you probably have to ask a bunch of people. But you can form a bunch of segmentation and could basically say, does this new person that comes up in the social stream, which of these segments do they fall into, and how am I going to perhaps initially approach them? So I think that's already happening, but we don't hear much about it. And go to the next slide. Buyer personas are created through research. They point that out. HubSpot and interviews with our audience, and it's a mix of customers, prospects, and even those outside. To collect both qualitative and quantitative data, as I mentioned, and figure out who your ideal customer is, and then you score everybody coming in and say, how close to that ideal customer is that? If it's really an ideal customer, maybe I should approach that one with a higher thing. It's all, it might be behavioral. A lot of newspapers do behavioral stuff and see, do these people look like they're the people that are profiled for the most likely? Okay, go on. Salesforce, I had it in the online version. You could actually play that. Just talks about what Salesforce is doing. Go on the next slide. And how you can take this information and slice it into buckets. Like in this case, this comes from Vistaprint and how they were looking at their social stuff and how they were using Lithium to kind of listen and segment and then go on. And then, sales channel optimization, use point of sale, is something that's happening. So I'll show you what that's like. This is a diagram that kind of shows how retail is affected by what the company wants and what the customers want and the influencers want. Basically, it's a back and forth, but the influencers can affect people coming into stores to buy stuff. That the company can respond to that. So this is kind of like a whole circular thing that gets you to think about those things. And go on the next slide. This was supposed to come out, but go on. I'm not going to talk about this one. Customer acquisition pathways can be non-linear, travel. So if you want to look at how people decide to buy, it's all over the place. They can come and touch multiple points of view. Of course, if you've got a lot of people, that you can start mashing and see the more popular ones, patterns, and that can help you optimize how you're going to reach out to people. Go on. And Dr. Dre, now Dr. Dre meets big data because the retailers are using big data to figure out should be in the store, and then they're looking at social media to see who's talking about it. And then because people are talking about it, that's telling retailers in turn that they should have more or less of that in stock, and then they decide where to place it in merchandising so they get the best bang of the buck, because the retailer makes more money by selling more things, so they want to make sure that what they have on the shelves is what people want, because if they don't put what's on the shelf that people want, they lose money and they have to reduce stock. So it's in retailers' advantage to use a lot of these technologies because it makes a difference to have in stock what people really want. And then this is another kind of intelligence that we use for some cases where we're matching up the actual sales that happen for a brand in affiliate, say, locations or stores like Target and Macy's and Best Buy versus where the ideal customer would be located based on their demographics and their buying behavior from third-party information. So you can get that. And then you can see what penetration your brand is versus the other brands. Go on. And again, I'll go past this one and go past this one. So you can get crowdsourced social sales intelligence using Facebook and Twitter big data and the wisdom of social graph by platforms such as Infinigraph. It's another one. Go on. This one uses people's sharing proclivities on a brand to see what other brands they go to. So this platform basically says that trending content for Burberry is this particular stuff as is last night. But they also like Gucci, Lady Gaga, Victoria's Secrets, Chanel, and these are the other brands, so that might be useful to you as a marketer to know that these same people that are fans of yours are also fans of these others and in strong affinity. Go on. And then you can see things like today, you can see the people who are reacting, so these could become people you reach out to. And go on to the next one. And then you can see, like in Twitter, for example, Burberry has a high affinity, Museum of Modern Art and Love magazine. Not that I now don't read Love magazine, but apparently they probably should know that. And Museum of Modern Art, that might be helpful for a brand manager. In fact, I posited that brand managers often should have a map of the universe as it looks like to their fans versus as it looks like to their brand. In other words, they should have a map of the universe of what they think the world looks like, and then another map that shows you how people actually, where they are, and see how far apart those two are. So go on to the next one. And then here on Facebook, Lady Gaga seems to be a prime person who is many people who like Burberry also like Lady Gaga, Shakira, and Katy Perry, which is interesting because it could be very interesting to get people who are musicians to kind of co-brand with Burberry. Go on. And of course, he does this for Vinograph for sectors, so they look at what's engaging for that sector, what's the best time, go on. And then, localized sales intelligence is another thing, go on. This is Venue Labs, which is a platform that actually does retail store, this is the Tees restaurant chain in Rhode Island. This is one of their locations, and it maps community size. Of that, how many people on Facebook and Twitter and, are that side and over time, and as well as the competitors. Go on. And you can see the competitors. Here's the community size. There's not much happening in Narragansett, but then again, these are the different, I've been to some of these, Crazy Burgers, Jewelry, and Sticks. Actually, I've been on the 3. Actually, I've been all 4, except from Phil's on Main Street, but I have been to that one. But it shows you what is the size of their online community. And is it growing? So that's a measure for community management. Also, some of the demographics of the people, as far as I can tell, it's online. So go on to the next one. And then this is another platform called Geophidia that really you can draw a map around an area, and it tries to find all the tweets and all of the posts on Instagram around that area. Great for the Boston Marathon thing that happened. They were using it for that. But basically, this platform can do that. And then go on to the next one. And then the last one I'll tell you is influence sales and political analysis by finding key players, secondary players, and gatekeepers. We'll go on to the next one. This is some research that comes from Carnegie Mellon University involved with projects, some of them military and defense contracted, that looks at events in the world to see, like here's an analysis of the Enron thing that happened like 12 years ago or 13 years ago, and who were the key players using social network analysis. Go on. These were the key, this is another one for Sudan about 3 years ago or 3 years ago, the Arab Spring, 2.5 years ago, showing the key players and the degree of betweenness and what do you call it, the Elgin factor? Eigenvector. How close, a lot of the same players are still out there, and we go to key factors for Egypt. Again, Hosea Mubarak is out, but some of these other people are there. And then you can kind of see as you go that the inequic analysis can tell you who's a latent and who's a gatekeeper. And the reason is that these latent leaders can become active leaders if the situation changes. The same could be done for sales as well. In other words, you can profile a network and say, who are the main people, who are the side people who could be the main people, and then who are the gatekeepers who may not necessarily be, but you can see these people, this can be mapped and profiled, and then go on. And the last is the media view of revolution, which lagged behind. It didn't match what social media was showing and what the other data was showing in a lot of cases. There weren't, I actually have to admit, I took this chart out, but I wasn't really 100% sure exactly what this one really said, except it seemed to suggest that, there was a difference between media's view of what happened in Arab Spring and what social media and other sources were saying. So that's, and so finally, that's, I believe that's it for me. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah. Sure.
Are you aware of any brands right now that are using Universal Analytics?
None that have publicly come out and said they were. I think a lot of people are thinking about it, but not that many have really invested a lot because they're going to have to retag a lot of stuff if they're going to use it, seriously. not everything, all the tagging is going to be different because they have a new tag to put in. So all of that would have to be written again. So that mostly what brands are doing is separating up a separate instance, a separate profile, and leaving the one that's currently running. Yeah.
Yeah, for your first project, you combined Salesforce with Wealth Engine.
Yeah.
Wealth Engine, I guess, is the provider database that's core to financial.
You could do it for your email list.
Yeah. The question is, why would Salesforce let you use their data?
Well, Salesforce is in partnership with a lot of companies now to let, as a data broker, to kind of create their own data cube in the cloud, and then let other, like companies that have interesting analytics products superimpose your data and store. That's what they've been doing for the last 2 years.
So Macy's was the client.
Well, I wasn't looking at Wealth Engine for that. Macy's I was looking at just simply LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook Insights and Facebook advertising. Those were the sources I looked. And I didn't look at anything else.
Hypothetically, if they have a Salesforce account, you combine with Wealth Engine and get a good model of high value.
You could, couldn't you? A lot of things you could do. I mean, there might be reasons why they didn't want to go that direction. One might be privacy. One might be that someone in the press might hear about it and say, Macy's is doing some kind of profiling. I think Nordstrom got zinged for doing something like that. Not exactly that, but I think I think a lot of executives are a little bit nervous about exactly what projects they want to be public about that they're funding, because the implications of having it come out in a way that could be very negatively impact their stock prices. So I think I want to be careful about exactly being transparent, and but the data is capable of doing that. Whether anybody wants to talk about it, the NSA is collecting a lot more data obviously than they clearly want to talk about. I think that's very clear. And in fact, they're running into hide to try to not talk about it because they don't want to have to explain it.
I can just tell you.
Sure.
It's not so secret anymore. Like political campaigns, they have a voter file. And quite literally at this point, you could run the voter file through a model and score the voter file. And likewise.
And that was what Obama was doing, and what a lot of the people would do.
It's not so secret anymore.
No, but when I was at Netroots Nation last year, they had it in Providence. I'd be in Providence at the time, so I went to it, and I attended all the sessions on voter analytics and how different districts were actually modeled and predictions were modeled, and how much most campaigns except the national ones can't really afford to have the kind of people on staff that would even be able to work with a data scientist to run kinds of experiments like A/B testing and testing to see, do I have 20,000 people that I could run and send some people this version of the email message versus this, I think there's a company called the Analysts Institute in Washington, D.C. that worked with a lot of progressive candidates to make sure, that their messaging was on target, to make sure the analytics informed it. And, most campaigns on a local or congressional level don't even have the necessary staff or technology or cultural knowledge to run these kinds of experiments, but the national and sometimes the governors do, and it's expensive. But the big national and the Democratic and the Republican Party have the money, and they are running it. Yeah.
Well,
So,
thank
sure.
you very much.
Thank you.
And we can keep open for a few minutes after
Sure.
after everything.
Sure,
If there's
thank
any
you.
questions for Marshall, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
sure.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Cheers.